What's up, men of Valor? So good to be back here with you today. My name is Randal. I will be one of your hosts today. And man, just really looking forward to the conversation. So thankful for each of you that join us and watch this podcast or listen to this podcast. You can catch this every Thursday on Spotify, iTunes, anywhere you get your podcast. And then you can also watch the video feed of the podcast on social media and YouTube and all of that. And so, man, we're glad that you guys are here. Looking forward to this conversation. And man, I'm excited for my co-host today. This guy is a dear brother of mine, a dear friend, and man, I got the opportunity to spend some time with him a couple weeks ago, and I'm excited to spend some time with him in August because this guy is going to be coming to the Men of Valor conference for the first time. He's going to be leading a session for our young men, and once you hear a little bit of his story and who he is, I think you'll be confident in bringing your young men to sit through some of his sessions and stuff. And so, my co-host today is Mr. John Blackford. John, how are you, man? Tell us who you are, where you are, what you do.
Man, what's up? My name is John Blackford. I'm glad to be here to talk with you today and just to spend some time hanging out and talking about this important area for every man, for every young man. I was born and raised around the Memphis area, specifically Marion, Arkansas, West Memphis, Arkansas, right by the Mississippi River, about 5 miles from downtown Memphis. And I was born and raised there. We now live in Springfield, Missouri. My wife is named Mallory. I have two little girls named Rosalind and Brooklyn. I love the St. Louis Cardinals, and I love coffee. And God's call on my life is to equip the next generation and their families for a lifelong faith in Jesus. And so yeah, man, that's pretty much a Cliff Note version of me. Yeah.
Yeah. John and I met several years ago. I won't get into that story because I'm still offended
Yeah,
by
please
it.
don't.
he he didn't let me join his flag football team, but I'm not bitter. Still holding on to that. I forgave him last week, but I stripped my forgiveness back. So
Oh no,
no,
please
John and I
don't.
became we became friends years ago in college, and he's still a dear friend. Man, we talk weekly, bounce ministry off of each other, and just kind of pray for one another. And so I've asked him to join us for this episode as we talk about some difficult things, but also want to equip our dads and our fathers, but all men as they commit to reach the younger generation. We want to help them not make the same mistakes that we make. And so, John, glad you're here, man. Nothing left
Yeah,
to
man, glad
do.
to be here.
Let's get after it.
This is the Men of Valor podcast. We exist to help men grow as disciples of Jesus.
Welcome to Season 2. We're glad you're here.
Let me tell you, I once was a sinner, but I am no longer a sinner. I am a saint. I am a son of the living God Most High.
Go home, embrace your wife with no expectations, and tell her that you love her. And ask her, how can I lead you? Tell me what you need. Be transparent, be open, be honest.
But if we arm ourselves and we never use what we have, that's useless. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening. Here are your hosts, Travis Watson, Eric Stewart, Jordan Loggins, and Randal Ballew. Let's get after it.
So glad that you guys are here with us today. We are going to have a conversation about a difficult topic. If you're listening to our podcast recently, you know that we're discussing the topic of sexual purity and striving for purity. And this topic is especially difficult because it is in reference to a young man's strive for purity. Many of us, some of us many, many years ago, some of us just a few years ago, were young men and growing up in today's world. And, you know, in my age, John, our age, we had access to things at a very, very young age. Guys older than us probably had to do a little bit more research to gain things, to slip them up and cause them to stumble. But today's world is unhinged. It is just a cesspool of just filth. Every app, every avenue that these young men go through and are a part of is just filled with just sexual filth. And
Mm,
unfortunately,
mm,
there's not a lot around that. And so, what we want to do today is we just kind of want to talk about what the role is as a man in helping a young man strive for purity, and then maybe some practical things that we can do to help. But we also want to spend some time today talking about forgiveness. This is a struggle that every man struggles with, and our children are struggling with it at a very young age. But truthfully,
one
this
moment.
is something that can be extremely difficult. And so, what we have to do is we have to be in front of this thing. We have to be in front of this thing. We have to be on top of it, and we can't shy away from it. And so, John, dealing with sexual purity, man, especially with teenagers, I think the first thing for me is they need to see that we're transparent, and they need to see that we're real. And they need to see that we're willing to own our mistakes before we even attempt to try to help them with this struggle. You've been in youth ministry for a long time. You've counseled students. You've probably counseled friends. As a father to two daughters, you're going to have a different perspective on things than I am as a father of
Mm.
two sons. And so, man, let me just ask you, what would you say, outside of being transparent and owning our mistakes, what would you say the biggest struggle is right now for the teenage boys in this circle of sexual purity?
I feel like their world is saturated in it. You cannot get on social media. Like, it is there. It is everywhere. And so, man, just being transparent in that, like, everyone, this is a this is a intentional this is a intentional effort to battle against every day for every male. Man, Jesus talks so much about striving for holiness and tools to have. And so, man, making sure that young men, teenagers, and young men know that there's tools available, and that they can be equipped. And so, I feel like that's the first step.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. We've got to give them the tools that they need. John, I'm not going to mention any names, and I'm going to ask that you not mention any names as well. But I can think of several young men that I've counseled over the past several
Mm,
years. Um, what would you consider the starting point for a young man's struggle with striving for sexual purity or when they slip up? Because I can remember my
mm.
first experience with impurity and pornography and these things, and how young I was and how terrible I was that I was exposed to that. What are you seeing maybe in your students and those around you? How early are they being exposed to these things?
I feel like way earlier than you and I were exposed, and I'm talking 9 years old, 10 years old. As soon as one of their friends gets an iPhone with internet and social media, I mean, um, it's it's not the same, but it it is the same. And as parents, we have to be intentional about being honest and talk about these topics ahead of time instead of doing damage control. As for that to be the goal. I know it's not always the goal, but for that to be the goal, and for young boys to know that they're not alone. What sexual impurity does, man, it brings shame and guilt and feeling unworthy and feeling dirty. And so for a preteen or a teenage boy, first and foremost, to know that they're not alone in this is huge because they're not alone.
That's right. That's right. And man, you make mention of that we need to be on the offense and not the defense. Instead of trying to do damage control, let's get ahead of this thing. And you said 9, 10 years old, man, makes me think of my 11-year-old, my 7-year-old. And, we've got content blockers on their devices and this and that. But those things aren't perfect. There's stuff that slips past them. And it's difficult for me, and just a disclaimer here, if children are listening, you may kind of want to turn this down or mute this part, but it's difficult for me to think that a child who believes in Santa Claus is exposed to pornography. I mean, and I'm not saying there's anything, wrong with Christmas and things like that, but just what a sick
Yeah.
world, man. Like the
Yeah.
innocence of a child, and they're exposed to these things. And John, what I found in my own personal life, just to be transparent, is there are images and things that I have seen as a child that I, I still see today. Like I can't strip those thoughts, as hard as I try. And God is so good, man, and he is forgiving, and he forgives me for my sins and my mistakes. But maybe because of lack of parenthood, or maybe because of lack of boundaries, I was exposed to things at a very young age, and man, those thoughts are there, and it's
Yeah.
almost like they haunt me. Um, and I have to fight against that. Like it's a real fight. And the hard part is I feel like I'm confident in that fight when it comes to me. Like I've got the tools, I've got the resources. I feel like I have a decent grasp on this, and I have accountability, and I'm really working hard to keep myself above reproach. My 11-year-old doesn't know how to do that. He doesn't know how to keep
Yeah.
himself above reproach. He's wanting
Yeah.
to hang out with his buddies, and if his buddy shows him a YouTube video, we expect our 11-year-old who will lie to us about not doing his homework to,
Yeah.
avoid a conversation that is inappropriate. And so I think
Mm.
part of the problem too, John, is we put unreal expectations on our young men.
Mm.
Um, we can have standards. Now don't
Yeah.
don't misquote me here. We can have standards, and we can have expectations of them living a godly life, but we put expectations on them that they're just going to be able to avoid and flee and run. And we see
Mm-hmm.
how that worked out for David. We
Mm.
see how that worked out. I remember going to my youth pastor, man, probably when I was 15, 16 years old, and just struggling, and telling him, like, man, every thought I have is just inappropriate. Like I can't fight this. Like I'm on the team with the guys, and man, they're all talking about it, and I, this is a struggle of mine. And he told me a verse, and I remember it. It's Psalm 19:14. It says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my
Mm.
heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer." And I recite that verse, and for years I just would say that verse over and over when a thought would come to mind. It wasn't until I was in my 20s when I actually started digging into that verse, and realized, I knew all along, but realized who wrote that verse.
Mm.
And when I find
Yeah.
out who writes that verse, or who wrote that verse, I'm thinking to myself, what a hypocrite,
Mm. Yeah.
about that
Man.
dude. And so I think not putting unreal expectations on our boys.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, man?
So whenever you talk about unrealistic expectations, like what an opportunity to communicate and to teach the gospel. Like, I mean, the gospel isn't strive to be perfect. And the the Christian doesn't the Christian knows that, like, he or she doesn't sin less because he's a Christian. The Christian's more aware of his unworthiness and his sinful nature more than ever, and that causes him or her to run to God even more, and to be close to God even more, because we didn't do anything to earn our salvation. And we think sometimes that there are real unrealistic expectations that we can never achieve, but that's not what the gospel calls us to do. The gospel calls us to surrender to him, and we acquire his fulfillment and his perfection.
Mm.
And so, like, what an opportunity to just say, like, Jesus is able to meet you here and to help you with this. And so, but yeah, that's just what comes to my mind when we talk about unrealistic expectations, man. Just what an opportunity to communicate and teach the gospel, you know?
Yeah, man. And it's that concept, and like you said, refuse to live in shame. Like,
Mm.
refuse to live in that shame. Obviously we should feel conviction for our sins,
Oh
and
yes.
I hope young men feel conviction when they mess up. Um, but they need to know too that there is grace and freedom through Christ, and that they don't have to forever label themselves or be labeled as someone who is sexually impure. They can be freed from that. Now there are consequences, and some of those consequences, John, are those images that stick with us. Some of those consequences are maybe other people label us things. Um, but at the end of the day, you're exactly right. The gospel is about freedom. It's about grace, and you know, I think the hard part, man, is thinking back to when I was 12, 13 years old, and slipping up and making mistakes and looking at things I shouldn't. And then immediately that just guilt that comes over me where I don't even want to look myself in the eye, right? I don't even want to
Yeah.
look in the
Right.
mirror.
Yes.
What a terrible, terrible thought to have of myself. If I am made new in Christ, even with my blemishes and even with my mistakes, I'm a new creation and I need to live in that. And I think if we do that, what happens, John, is if we develop that mindset and we help grow that and this is definition of discipleship, but we help grow that mindset of being new and being made new in Christ, then young men will begin to choose things of Christ instead of things of the world. Um,
Yes.
man, I'm studying right now some emotional traits and things like that. Just trying to make myself a better person,
Mm.
a better human, and
Yeah.
in doing so, one of the things that is discussed is replacement therapy, right?
Okay.
Talking about taking like a negative thought and replacing it with a positive one.
Mm.
Well, that concept works great as long as you remove that negative thought.
Right.
If you have a negative thought, you replace it with a positive thought, but you let that negative thought stay, then that negative thought's going to come back. And so I kind of think the same thing with, you know, with sexual purity. We should strive to love God, love things of God, choose God even in these moments. But we also need to encourage young men, flee those things. Flee sexual immorality. Maybe you don't need a phone. Like, maybe you don't need an iPhone. Maybe 14 years old, dad, and you're like, well, I got to pick my kid up from baseball practice and I got to be able to communicate with him. Listen, man, Walmart still sells the dinosaur phones and you
They
can't get
do.
on the internet and them things. And if you could, it
They
looks
do.
like I don't know. It's just whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. So maybe we need to set our sons up for success instead of setting them up for failure. I mean, man, I'm guilty of it. My 11-year-old has a phone, and and we use it to communicate. He doesn't carry it with him, but he plays on it at home. Now I check it religiously. Um, and I've got software that I can read every message he sends, and
Right. Good. Yeah.
maybe a little creepy. I don't know, but
No. 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 Not at all.
but it's one of those things, man. Like, we got to set our children up for success, and then as a youth minister, we got to set our students up for success. Which means, and I'd like you to speak on this, John. If we want to set our students up for success, we've got to help our parents be set up for success. So, John, what would you say, or how would you equip, or how would you help the dad who is dealing with a son who may be addicted to pornography or maybe, having sex before marriage? What would be your encouragement to him?
I would say that it's important for the father to have connections with other men, to constantly have that accountability and that encouragement, and to get comfortable talking with his teenager about these things and to be honest, as much as possible. Um, what comes to my mind is the way your family home flow. Like if everyone is by themselves on their tablet watching TV on their phone, then that's going to set the teenager up for success to be a recluse on his phone. Like if the son sees his dad modeling a a simple dignified life, then what's caught is what was that saying about the teacher is the lesson? I remember in college, one of our professor, he said that the lesson is caught more than taught, and so like
Yeah.
what that teenager is seeing modeled in his dad's life is going to be caught more than what's taught. And so it's important for the dad to cultivate his own faith and um, be locked in and be vulnerable with his son, because like, man, people want to
Yeah.
know that you're real, and that open line of communication. I forgot what your question was.
No, dude.
What I just started rambling.
No,
But
dude, that
I
was
feel like I stayed on
good.
track. I feel like I stayed on track.
No, that was good. Good, man. You said, I mean, more is caught than taught, and that's exactly right. Like, I mean, you answer the question, how can we encourage our dads who may have a son who's struggling? And you're right, man, they got to be transparent, they got to own it, but have the conversation. You know what I mean? Be real. And you're right, man. Put your phone away. Like, be present with your family. Um, my wife is going to listen to this, and I'm going to feel instant conviction as soon as she reads this or listens to this. And I'm going to see if maybe we can just cut out these last few minutes. Because the first thing she's going to do when she listens to this, she's going to text me like, "Oh, so you need to start putting your phone away, huh?" And it's like she doesn't understand. Like I've got this NASCAR game I'm trying to beat on my phone right now. This is important. Like this is real life stuff, John. Like
March
I'm trying like
Madness.
yeah, March Madness. Like, listen, man, I'm in the top five, so I mean, I'm trying to get on the podium, but she doesn't understand how serious this is.
Yeah,
No, in all
yeah.
seriousness, man, we need to set aside those things and be more intentional. John, so thinking about the challenge to have that conversation, we already discussed that children are being exposed to this stuff at such a young age. I'm always left with the mindset of I want my son to hear things from me before he hears things from other
Yes,
people.
yes.
Um, how do we start that conversation with our children? How do we how do we guard their hearts? Because here's the thing,
Mm,
we don't want to have a too explicit conversation with our children and then expose them to things because of our conversation.
right, right, right.
But we want to get ahead of this. So how do we begin
Yeah,
that conversation?
man. I feel like it should be as natural as possible. Yes, like go into his bedroom, close the door, and talk. But also, like, I think about Deuteronomy 6:4, where it talks about parents teaching their kids the ways of the Lord while they are in the house, while they're walking by the way, while they're eating dinner. And so like making that everyday discipleship teachable moments with your kid, it could be, you can have a little bit of a conversation in the truck on the way home from the grocery store, you know.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's where I would start. I would start having that open line of communication about those things, and you know open it up to the teenager, you know like, what are the boys talking about?
Yeah.
And I know that's different for a 9-year old than a 14-year old, but making sure that your teenager knows that they can talk to you and that nothing's off limits.
Yeah.
And I have a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old girl. So I am not experienced in this with a son. But as a youth pastor, as soon as you reveal to them that nothing's off limits at church, as far as questions asked and topics discussed, oh man, it's like they're in game time. Like, let's
Yeah.
roll. I love this because this is what's going on at school. This is what's going on in the locker room. I don't feel like I can talk about this, and then now we can. Awesome. And so, I sometimes kids don't know that topics are off limits. Um, Wait, did I say that right? They think that there's limits to the
Yeah.
discussion. Like they need to hide their real questions. And so, man, that everyday discipleship moments and making sure our kids know that nothing's off limits. And I know that they will come to the parents when they want to talk, but knowing that they can, that they don't have to hide their questions that they might have or those type of things. But that's
Yeah.
what comes to mind for me.
No, man, I like that. You avoid the big summit meeting. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? You avoid the big come in and sit down. If you're doing those daily things, you're discipling
you're right.
daily.
Right.
Um, those summit meetings suck, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we see a lot of those in youth ministry because unfortunately, and this isn't a shot at our parents, love our parents, like our parents of our students, but a lot of them will admit that they're not discipling well. And
Mm,
so what happens is the problem gets out of hand. And again, now we're doing damage control. We had this huge summit meeting where so many more people are involved than should be.
mm,
When if dad was willing to have a transparent conversation years before, that could have possibly been avoided. John, I'm thinking about, my wife and thinking about Lauren and how, her and I kind of discuss these things with our boys. And, you mentioned being a dad of two girls. I would assume Mallory is probably going to handle the majority of those conversations as your girls mature and grow up. Now, knowing you're gonna be involved in that because you love and adore your
right.
girls. Um,
Right.
is that sexist of me to have that assumption, or is that how God made us? Because I feel like it's my role as the father of my sons
Hmm.
to speak to them what it means to be a godly man, just as if I feel like it's Mallory's role to speak to your girls what it means to be
Yeah.
a godly woman. And you can obviously assist in that, you can help in that, you can
Right.
support that. But do you see what I'm saying there? Is that
Oh yeah.
reaching, or is
Definitely.
that
Man, no, I obviously daughters are going to connect more with their mothers and vice versa for sons with their dads. And so the other party, the other spouse, man, like is a comes alongside what, the other spouse is doing. I want my daughters when they see my life and how I treat their mom to like that's the bar for whoever they marry. And so like those girl talks that they have about sex and sexual identity and intimacy and guardrails to protect them from um, impurity and making sure that they're healthy and safe. Like what Mallory says to them, I need to come alongside her and support and so that they know that like, hey, this isn't yes, mom's in your room with you talking, but dad's on the same team here, and we're going the same direction with the same goal. And so I do feel like it's not so much a one player game. I do feel like it's a two-player game, and husbands and wives need to have a game plan and be
there
intentional.
you go?
And I'm about to really like, um, Rosin's turning 7 in April, and my time's really coming, and so, um, but anyways, I feel like it's a two-player game, not just a one player, and
Yeah. Well, man, and you
uh,
mentioned
but
they need to have a game plan, which means you and your wife need to have a conversation before. And so, Lauren and I have been, slowly talking about how we want to handle things, and probably not as much as we should, but
right,
that's how you set yourself up for success. Have a conversation before you go in there. Like, I don't want her to ever be blindsided by a conversation I have with my kids. Like if Caleb asks me an intense, now there are some things that I'm not saying I will keep from her, but there are some details
yeah,
as his mother that, I don't want her thinking he's a disgusting little kid or anything like that. But,
hmm,
you may not have to be as graphic, but go with the understanding that, dude, I love you and you have confidence in me, and I'm be your confidant, Caleb and Cooper. But dude, your mom's got an inside scoop. Like we're in this
yeah,
together. Like I got your
yeah,
back. I do. But your mom is gonna know. Like
hmm,
I now I'll be the one to come talk to you face to face and we'll discuss this. And I said, but that's the thing. You got to have that conversation ahead of time. You got to be on the same page, because the worst thing that can happen is you have an intentional conversation with your child about something serious like this, and then they question the other parent, and the other parent
Mm,
gives them a different answer. Boom, you're already playing from behind. I mean, you're done.
yeah.
Like, I mean, you might as well just chalk it up as a loss, because if you're not united on the front end, um, and fortunately, I don't think that happens to most parents. But if you have a parent who's a believer and a parent who's not a believer, um,
Mm,
they might have very different approaches to sexual purity and
yeah.
sexual identity and sexual matters. Um, you know, Worst thing that can happen is to have a mom who desires for her children to be sexually pure and wait until marriage, but then a dad who, throws a box of condoms at his kid and says, "Don't get her pregnant."
Yeah.
I mean, what a mind screw, right? I mean, you just,
Yeah.
well, I guess I'll just make my own decisions. John, I do want to talk a little bit about some practical things.
Mm,
Maybe these are things you've done in your life. Maybe these are things you've encouraged other men in our last. We got a little bit of time left, but um, what are some practical things that you think young men could do, or that men could do to help young men? And I'll just name one that we talked about earlier. Man, get rid of the access.
mm.
Eliminate as much access as you possibly can. I think that's a good place to start. Man,
Yeah. I
cut the head
mean,
of the snake off.
those are the words of Jesus. Like, if your right arm causes you to sin, it's better for you to go um into heaven with one arm than your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out.
Yep.
Like, getting rid of it isn't the it's not the end of the world. If you say, I'm not going to have a smartphone, or man, I don't know where I heard this, but I was listening. This was years ago. It was a grown man talking about what he does to fight um, um, sexual impurity, and he was like, for me, I am not going to be at home by myself. Like, I am not gonna open up that door to be at home by myself and to be complacent and to be like David. And I felt like that when I heard it. I was like, that is so extreme. But like, is it though? Like, I'm gonna find something to do to keep me busy, to keep me disciplined, so that I'm not potentially going to fall into temptation. Because that's what James says. We're not, like, God does not tempt anybody. We're tempted when we put ourselves in position to be tempted. But I don't know. I interrupted you just talking about, that's
No.
what Jesus said, like, remove the access.
But you're right. You're right. I love the idea of don't let them be isolated. I mean, unfortunately, there are times where Caleb has to be home alone while we're taking Cooper to the doctor. We're doing something. We've got appointments, but eliminate as many of those times as you can. Like, don't let your child be alone with access to these things. Here's the thing, man. Our kids, they don't need access to things if they have their own imagination. And
Right,
and so, man, that is
right.
extreme. I can imagine how difficult that would be,
Yeah.
but what a commitment.
But like, I think it was just as simple as, hey, instead of being inside my house where I am tempted to go get on the couch and get on my phone, I'm going to work in the garage.
There you go.
Like, I'm going to go on a walk. You know what? I need to go to the store. You know what I'm saying? But I don't even know who said it, but obviously I've remembered it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, but that's the thing, man. Get your kids active. Get them doing
mm,
something. Get them outside. Get them throwing a ball, playing a trampoline. Get them reading a book. Whatever it is, man. Get them doing
yeah,
something.
right,
Just dead
right.
time is dangerous time.
Like,
Um,
I'm thinking about my 7 and 5 year old, and if all they do is see their mom and dad glued to a screen, whether it's tablet, TV, phone, um, that they're gonna think that's normal.
I
And
told you
so, like,
Lauren's listening to this.
so that's convicting to me.
You're gonna get me in trouble. I
Oh
regret
man,
having you on.
man. Well, I am preaching to myself, man, because like I am glued to my screen. Like we just live in a time where it is second nature to pick up your phone. And
Yeah.
so much so that our phone records it. It shows how many times it wakes up. It's called a pickup. And I'm not even looking at mine. I don't even know how many times I have picked up my phone in 24 hours because it's a
Can't even
lot. I'm
tell.
not doing that. But man, like, why'd I get on this podcast, man? Now I got some next steps that I got.
Yeah. Yeah. So our next episode will be Randall and John applying the lessons that they're offering all the other men that are
Yeah, it's
listening.
man.
So
When I was in seminary, we had this thing called report hour, and we had to. It was required to share the gospel, to be soul winners, and to record the times that you shared the gospel that week. And we would have before chapel an opportunity for the student body and professors to go and share their experiences. And so, like next week can be report hour. Like, all right, like how did we do with our screen time this past week?
I think we get a better an accurate view if we had Mallory and Lauren do the report hour.
Oh,
They might not be as gracious as we are to ourselves.
yeah, but they're on their phones too.
Yeah, both of you. Dang it. Anyways, not sure how to
But
segue from that, but
yeah, we were talking about removing the excess. So what's your next point?
yes, yeah, practical. Man, I think too, uh, know who your children's friends are.
Mm,
Like, learn who your young man, like you have a 16, 15, 16-year-old, man, and they have friends, and maybe you don't like their friends, maybe they're tough. Invite their friends over for dinner. Like, invite them to go on a weekend trip, invite them to go to church with you. Like, get to know your friends.
yeah, yeah.
There's a guy in our church. He's actually on staff here as he does our finance and stuff, and he's got several sons. He's got 3 sons in our youth ministry, and his oldest son, man, loved the kid to death. When I first met him and I butted heads a lot, but man, we're in a great place now, and he's a great kid. And this dude has brought somebody to church, I think, every single Wednesday since I've been here.
Mm, wow.
And something that I've noticed his family does, man, is they let people in. Like,
Mm,
he's got friends that want to street race and make bad choices and skip school and stuff like this. They're inviting them over for dinner.
wow.
And I
That's
mean, I
awesome.
think that's a practical thing that dads can do to help young men get to know their friends. Because once you get to know their friends, if you truly put in the time and effort, then when you go to your son and you say, hey, buddy, listen, I know we've been getting to know so and so. I'm glad he's coming. I think he might be a little bit of a bad influence on you.
Yeah.
And if you've put in the effort and the time to get to know that kid and you're pouring into him and you have to go to your son with that hard conversation, I really think he's going to be more prone to listen to you than if you just
Yeah.
said he's a punk, stay away from him, right?
You're right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Some good stuff.
Good
Good stuff.
stuff.
And it showed like you're modeling for your family like community and hospitality. Like you want to welcome people into y'all's life and to share that with you, you know?
Yep. Yep.
But
Man, it's such a sad thing that young men have to struggle and put up with this nonsense. And I think the last thing, John, and you and I both referenced it, but you made good mention of it. Study the word, study the word, and make sure that you have ammunition to fight. Because man, the enemy is tricky. He's deceitful. He doesn't fight fair.
mm,
Um, he brings a 2x4 to a stick fight, and he doesn't care. And so we've got to know our value. We've got to know that we have freedom, and we've got to know that we can flee these things. We can run from these things. Even thinking about David, we've mentioned a few things. Had David removed himself from that situation on the balcony as a thumb, that was weird. Why'd that do that? Had David had David
perfect.
removed himself, um, then that might not have happened. Had David had somebody with him, that might not have happened. had he, had he had people get to know him and say, hey, won't you not hang out up there anymore? Won't you stay away from those people or that place? Maybe that doesn't happen, right?
Mm,
And
yeah.
so I think, man, we've got to put our boys in positions to succeed. Um, and lastly, I'll say this, John. We also we need to take responsibility, but we need our young men to know that their sin is their sin.
Mm,
Like it's their sin and they have to deal with it, right?
mm,
And
yeah.
they need to know the consequences of their sin. And so I say you got to put in the time, put in the effort, but you got to speak boldly and plainly. John, your experience with teenagers, especially teenage boys, and this how we'll kind of wrap this up. Why do men and why do even a lot of religious leaders or pastors or student pastors, why do we feel like we have to dumb down the truth
Mm,
of the gospel and
oh
dumb
man.
down the truth of sin? Why
Oh
why
man.
do we
I
not
don't
speak it so
know.
plainly?
I don't know. I maybe it was that shift of like entertainment driven ministry, But these teens, man, they can handle it. They are walking the halls with questions about gender identity and pronouns and man and they're in trigonometry and pre-algebra and learning how to do math with numbers and letters. Like they can handle theology and I don't know, but I don't know why, but we can start taking back some ground and be bold. um you know I've been really trying to just give the students the word every Wednesday night and Sunday instead of my cunning little intros, and like just
Yeah.
go straight to the word. And those times when I commit to do that, I feel like the students are more engaged than when I'm trying to soften the blow to get to God's word with something relevant. Like, what does First Peter say? Let's look at it, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, um, this generation, man, has been labeled the now generation, the revival generation, because of what's just been observed over the last couple of years. And I truly believe it. I believe that these students, um, they they can make huge impacts in their culture and their sphere of influence.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't shy away from
Yeah.
being bold and being blunt, and talking about it. One of the things that I like, I realize is that we at in youth ministry we can't do a relationship series and a love and a marriage series and not talk about what to do with gender identity questions and same sex marriage questions. Like because if we don't touch on those things, they might not be listening to us because that's not their world. Like
Yep.
their world is answering those questions, talking about it, giving them the tools to navigate it. But anyways, I'm rambling again.
No, man, and
But
if I can
we
add
gotta
to
be
that,
bold.
John, you're right. We've got to be bold. If I could add to that, we need to have those difficult conversations. But man, can I challenge you? Do the work and study. Stop
Mm,
regurgitating and just repeating what some online nonsense wannabe
mm,
theologian is saying about these things. Study the word, find out what the word says about those things, and share that with your
yeah.
students. And man, I want to end with this. If there are any young men listening, um, I want to say this. John and I speak for both of us. We want to encourage you. We want you to know that you're not alone. We want you to know that the struggle that you're fighting with, you don't have to struggle with that forever. There is freedom, and that freedom is through the love of Christ and the blood of Christ. And this doesn't have to define you. The sin
Mm,
that you're struggling with doesn't have to define you. And if you're listening and you're a dad and man, you're just kind of beside yourself and you don't know what to do with your boy who's struggling, uh, who's trapped by pornography or trapped by sin, I just want to encourage you and let you know that just keep working. Don't stop.
yes,
The only way you fail is if you quit.
that's right.
And they need you. They need
That's
you to be
right.
present and they need you to be bold, like John said. Speak boldly. And going back, man, we'll end with this. I love that quote that you said from the professor, and when he said that, I
Mm,
remembered it. Uh, and I don't want to misquote it, so you can correct me, but
Yeah.
they're going to pay more attention. There's going to be more that's caught than taught.
Mm.
And man,
Yeah.
that's a good way to live by.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Well, John, man, I appreciate you joining
Yeah,
me here.
man.
This was fun.
Very fun,
I'm
man. Thanks for
excited.
having me. Enjoyed it.
Absolutely. I'm excited for you to come to the conference. I will say this, guys. I trust this guy. I've gotten to see him do ministry, face to face and in person, and he's the real deal. He loves his students. He loves his family, loves his church. I wish his church was in Arkansas, but I'll get over it. And the only thing I have against you, John, is the flag football incident. That's the only thing. Other than that, you're a pretty solid dude.
Well, good.
Yeah, except for I want to
Still
punch
get
you in
an
the
A.
face. But yeah, if I ever start a pickup team, you're the last pick. I'll pay the other. I don't care.
I'll take my bat and go home, dude.
Yeah.
No one's playing.
Spoken like a true you bastard. Well, hey guys, we're so glad that y'all joined us today. This was awesome, and look forward to seeing y'all at the conference. Man, John, I'm excited that you're going to be there. If you guys, any of you guys coming to the conference, want to reach out to me and John, I'll drop our emails in the chat or on the caption. If you have any questions about anything we talked about or discussed, we'd love to go further. Our lives are busy, but they're never too busy for gospel conversations. And so
That's right.
love to encourage you any way we can. And so, John, man, thanks for being on. It's a pleasure. Any last words?
Man, no, just, hey, stay fighting and one day at a time.
One day at a time. There we go. All right, fellas. We'll see y'all later.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode and that you will continue to join us on this journey to make disciples of men. Be sure to check out our social media outlets as well as movministries.org for any information, and be sure to join our digital men's community.
Hey guys, we wanted to let you know that Men of Valor podcast is proud to partner and be a part of the Recovering Fundamentalist Podcast Network. You can find their podcast and many other great podcasts by going to rfpnetwork.org. We would love for you to go and check them out as well. Hey, keep fighting, win today, and as always, go light it up for the King.